Welcome to today's episode of Her Version. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of struggle to triumph, a platform that allows individuals to tell their truth, to inspire and uplift others. For those of you that are new to this podcast and like content like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button, follow, like, and share. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria. Let's jump right in. Hello, and thank you for joining us today for this episode of Her Version. Thank you so much for those of you that are already jumping on live. We so appreciate it. If you could share this video wherever you are watching us at so that more eyes and ears can get on the content, we would love it. Thank you for joining us for this version of the Her Version podcast. We are built on storytelling and the understanding that many times our greatest learning experiences come from listening to other people's stories. Today, I'm speaking with an amazing woman named Kimberly Spencer. Kimberly is an award-winning high-performance trauma-informed coach and trainer, Amazon bestselling author, TEDx speaker, and the founder of crownyourself.com. Love that. Helping visionary leaders transform their self-limiting stories, build their empire, stand out fearlessly, and make the income and the impact they deserve. From her entrepreneurial beginnings at selling bags of glitter water to her neighbors, to becoming an award-winning screenwriter, certified Pilates instructor, Miss Congeniality, and 6-time WEGO Health Activist Award nominee. Kimberly is proof that there's better to make your own mold than to conform to someone else's. She also is the former executive of national e-commerce startup and was the owner of the private Pilates studio, Fitness with Kim in Los Angeles, California. Her work has been featured on Netflix, the CW, ESPN, Chicken Soup for the Soul, and NPR, and in Thrive Global, CNBC, and Forbes. Welcome, Kimberly. How are you?
I'm doing great, Sabrina. I love the snaps. It reminds me of my nickname in high school was Elle Woods. And so the snap cup, having snaps.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, I love snapping. It just gives me so much joy because people need to be acknowledged for the awesome things that they're doing. And you can't always clap. So snapping to me is everything. It's just become part of who I am and something that I love doing. I do want to ask though, selling glitter water. You have to share this before we dive in.
So I was blessed with growing up with 2 entrepreneur parents. And so my mom was like pushing me in the stroller while passing out flyers for their tree business. So me and the neighborhood kids like did tons of like entrepreneurial ventures. And one was selling bags of glitter water. And it is what it is. It was a plastic bag with water in it that had glitter in it. And I didn't know this, at the time, I was split testing price points because I was selling them for either 5 cents or $50 and seeing what price the market would bear. So I never got anyone to pay me $50. But the concept behind it was a hot day in LA. And I thought, well, if you're hot and sweaty, like you might as well like glisten and sparkle and feel good. And you can just pour this was like the 90s. So it was before edible glitter. So this was like pure toxic glitter that at least you could pour on your body and feel beautiful. So that was one of my first products that I ever sold.
Oh my gosh. So the concept was what? To like actually put it on your body? So you would
pour it on your body for a refresher. So like, you're hot, you need a little spritzer. So you could just dab a little on, little water with a little glitter, feel good, sparkle. Yeah, that was the concept.
I love that. Did your mom help you kind of like bag it and glitter it or?
No, that was all me. That was me. My mom helped with other projects like along the way because she definitely she sewed 20 Pocahontas costumes for my Pocahontas themed backyard production that I did. But I'm like, as a mom, I'm like, that goes above and beyond. I don't think I would do that for my children's birthdays. but she did. Perks of being an only child, I guess. And having an older mom who was like, I was the lucky draw, the lucky last go. And so, she did. I would put on backyard productions as well. So I love stories. I love transforming people's stories. That's what I've always been in the business of. And I would always have stories of like princesses who had to like overcome some challenge and rise into their reign. That's the name, Crown Yourself, for my business. But like I've been doing this since I was 5. But back then I was doing like backyard productions. And so my mom sewed 20 Pocahontas costumes for all the girls that were in the product that I like corralled into the production, which by the way is a lucrative business model as well, because parents will always pay to see their kids in a show.
Yes. Oh, I love that idea.
Yeah. Built-in audience, like demand will come exactly with it.
So is there any VHS tapes of you just like prancing around as Pocahontas?
We just moved and I got all of the Pocahontas one production was not there, but we did have the Aladdin production where I transformed Jasmine into being the hero instead.
Wow.
So there is VHS tapes that have now been digitized on my hard drive.
That is so cool.
And it's so fun to see it because now I see my son who's 5 years old and he has all these amazing ideas and he wants to go to, Jupiter and he wants to be an astronaut and a rocket scientist. And I see this like fire and passion that he has. And I was watching some of my old movies as a kid and I was like, oh my gosh, he's me. There were so many similarities of just the level of confidence that he has. Sometimes I was like, I had that knocked down a few notches and then had to build it back up myself. But man, I was watching some videos and my mom was like, how do you think you're going to get through like the dangerous forest? And I was like, I just will. You just go.
That is fantastic. What's your son's name?
Declan. And Declan and Colton. I have a 5 and a 1-year-old.
Beautiful. Never heard Declan before.
It's Gaelic. Yeah. Okay. My husband and I are both Scottish and Irish. Mixes.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Fantastic names. Love it. Well, I'm so excited to have you here and all of the goodness that you bring to the world and your community. And I'm so excited to kind of dive deep into all of the things. But I would love to kind of just open the floor to you to be able to share some of your story, some of your journey. The listeners here on this podcast love to hear a good story of darkness to light, of struggle to triumph, and all of the goodness that some of us, really get through and then learn from and then build upon. So, what story, what journey do you have that you love to share with your audience?
Well, I love the story, and I've always been obsessed with those stories of like what makes someone successful? Like why is it that some champion, I've always been obsessed with the stories of princesses. And a lot of that was coming from a form of escapism. Because when I was a child, like as great as it was being raised by 2 entrepreneur parents, my dad was also a highly functioning addict. And if you look at the Richter scale, I think the CDC has a scale of the 10 traumas that you can go through as a child. And I had 8 of them. Just if you know what growing up with an addict, and it's interesting because those who know my father and who knew him, you would never suspect it. He was always very effervescent and very outgoing in the life of the party and all that. And yet at the same time, like behind closed doors, like my mom and I, speaking of those home movies, we were watching some of the videos and there were some that we just felt super uncomfortable with. Like we were just like, oh, okay, I don't really want to watch this. Just because like to the rest of the world, there was a persona that we saw, and then there was what we saw at home. And sometimes, especially in the height of his addiction, which was during my childhood, it was really challenging at times. I mean, I saw my dad get arrested in front of our house when I was 6 years old, and my mom made me stand there and watch that. And she's like, there are consequences to actions.
Wow.
So, like growing up with that was not easy. If you've lived with an addict, if you know an addict, like the constant up and down, waiting for the other shoe to drop, like there are some deeply rooted childhood patterns that I had to really work through. And ultimately, it ended up with me in a 10-year battle with bulimia because I believe that I was broken, damaged, and a victim because of the experiences that I went through as a child, which ranged from emotional abuse to sexual abuse. And from that experience, I didn't know how to trust my body. I didn't know how to be in this being. And so that manifested as a hyper control of bulimia as a teenager. And then that led me into searching for a better way. And the beautiful thing was that despite my parents' flaws and challenges, I mean, I think the other challenge was that my mom stayed with my dad until he died. And he only recently passed a couple years ago. And it was that experience of seeing that I thought, okay, I have an ingrained sense of such hope for people's transformation. Because in the last 4 years of his life, he was phenomenal. He was the great sober dad that I always loved. I like to say that I grew up with 4 dads. Like I had the asshole alcoholic, the laid back stoner dad who didn't really care about anything, the opioid manic pill popping dad who would like come home with like a slot machine one day because he just wanted to buy it. And it would stay there in the middle of our dining room table for months, not moving. Or the really cool sober dad. And I loved the sober dad. So for the last 4 years of his life, after I staged his intervention in 2016, he was very proud that he had been sober off of alcohol, which was always the worst. But needless to say, like growing up in that environment really embedded patterns of a belief that I was a victim of my circumstance, a heightened reactionary to stimuli. My sympathetic nervous system was firing all the time, fight, flight, freeze. I was constantly exhausted. And at the same time, I had my parents that always believed in me. Like they always believed that whatever it was that I wanted to do, I could do. They were 100% supportive of every ambition and every crazy career change from screenwriter to Pilates instructor to e-commerce business owner. They were like, so I had this dichotomy. And it was through that dichotomy that I ended up dropping out of college 2 weeks before I was supposed to start, even with 2 scholarships, and said, I'm going to go into the entertainment industry. That's what I wanted to do. I chased that for a few years, ended up getting my first screenplay and getting that distributed and produced and on Netflix. And it was very, very exciting. And it was very surprising that during that experience, the press didn't believe that I wrote it because they see me as like strong female, but definitely female. It was a very hardcore, gritty movie about drugs and motocross, and people were like, how did this like really nice pretty girl write this? And I was like, well, live the life. So so it was surprising, but simultaneously to support myself in that career, I found Pilates. And it was through finding Pilates that I actually started to retrain my physiology. I actually got to activate my parasympathetic nervous system, work my body in a way that actually made me feel good. And I remember doing Pilates and I was like, oh my God, I have to teach this. Because for the first time in my life, I felt good about my body. I felt good about how I was working it. And that's what got me started on the path of personal development, was actually through my physiology and embodiment, which led me then into the business and getting started in e-commerce startup, selling a back stretching device, and then into more deeply into personal development with my coaching business later on.
Wow. One of the things that I remember you mentioning is growing up with an addict giving you superpowers. What does that mean?
So when you grow up with an addict, you have a level of sensory acuity that is very different than what a lot of normal families might have, because you're constantly on the lookout for like the behavior, and it's a completely unconscious thing. It's a survival mode mechanism. But what it's allowed me to do now is like, I can see in my clients' eyes, I can feel from their persona, I can feel from their energy, I can see the little micro muscle movements in their body when they're about to have a breakthrough, or when I'm leaning into something as their coach that's making them uncomfortable. That's like, I'm like, that's a spot where there's some gold nuggets there that I get to dig, and that now I'm paid for to dig. But unfortunately, that skill set is not really highlighted when you're 5 and correcting your father. So that it was a skill set that I had to retrain myself, that was actually a superpower, because for a long time, my ability to challenge, my constant desire to see people better, my constant belief and hope that we can evolve and become greater than the sum of our limitations, like that was something that I always had from growing up with an addict, like, because I would always have that hope. Every time he would get sober, I would always have that, like, okay, this is it. Like, this is it. And in the back of my mind, I'd have that fear of like, okay, well, what are the contingency plans if that doesn't happen, et cetera, et cetera. But it allowed me to have instilled this like epic hope that I believe that people can change. They're completely change the trajectory of their life. Mm-hmm. When they so choose, when they choose to put themselves at cause, when they choose to stand in their power. I have seen it happen, like just with staging my father's intervention. It was not a comfortable experience. It does take a serious level of discomfort and courage to stand in your power and say like, enough is enough. I am done. And I believe that you can transform, and I'm holding a higher standard for you to be able to evolve. And should you want to meet me at that higher standard, I will be there with open arms. And it's a very prodigal son sort of story. But at that same time, like, I saw that transformation happen. And in the last year of a couple years of my dad's life, I got to see him in the role that I'd always believed that he could be in. And it was fantastic. It was fantastic to be able to see that dream realized. I mean, I just found one of his notes, one of the last notes that he wrote to me. And it was like, Kim, thank you for the intervention, 4 years sober. And it was like, that stayed with him, but it took an immense amount of courage. And I think that's a huge point, is that if you want the transformation, if you really truly desire to transform and evolve, it takes a fuck ton of courage.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that I really appreciate about you and about, you know, the concept that you teach as far as the importance and the power of sharing your story, and how much it inspires and helps other people. You know, I run a podcast, and I talk to many women, not all the women, but many women before the podcast. And many times they open up and they share things. And then when it's time to jump on the podcast, there is not one inkling of the original story that they told me that drops onto the podcast. And that's not for me to judge, or for me to be upset, or for me to even mention. But my question to you is, why are you so obsessed? Why do you preach so heavily the importance of sharing those hard to share stories?
Ooh. It just hit, and my contact went out. So obviously there's something there. What initially came to me is I made a promise. I made a promise to my dad in 2018 after he'd become sober. He too was sexually abused as a child. And we were at a conference, and I was exposing him to this world of personal development and like the world of coaching, and like what I'd been, you know, the Kool-Aid that I'd been drinking basically for the past few years. And he was there, and he was so profoundly shook to his core with the level of love and compassion and possibility that was there. And Lewis Howes was there, and Lewis Howes shared his story of his own experience of sexual abuse. And my dad just crumbled. And he said, Kim, you have to share. I give you full permission. And I said, he goes, not that you'd need it, but he goes, I know you've restrained yourself. And it's true. When he was alive, I didn't share about certain aspects of what I grew up with, simply because I don't think the world is as forgiving or as open to forgive as fast as possible. And sometimes when you paint somebody in a specific light, the term, child molester, it sticks. And I didn't want that to be a title that stayed with my dad, because that's not who he was as a sober adult. Like and I think it's a huge piece. And when he said that, I told him, I said, I absolutely will. And he said he needed me to do it for himself, because he didn't have the courage to share his own experience of what he went through with a abusive mother. And that was so enlightening to see. And then I shared, it was in a very similar personal development seminar that I was at. And I was there, and I was surrounded, it was like 2,000 people. And the moderator encouraged everyone to gather in a group and share the most challenging challenge that they went through. And like my big secret to that point, it was like 2018, had been being molested as a child by my father. And when I stood in that group, and it just so happened that I was in a group with one of my clients who I knew what her abuses were, having come from a narcissistic marriage, and the severe emotional abuse that she had withstood for years. And then I was in a group with another gentleman who is a fellow coach who had been raped. And it was in that experience that we were gathering together, and I look across the room and I see this guy, and it was that superpower. And I said, he needs to be, my gut was like, he needs to be in our group. And I was like, hey, come on over here. And so I invite him into our group, and we all start sharing this, each of our stories, and they get progressively worse, each challenge. And so finally it's kind of coming around to this gentleman, and I look in his eyes and I'm like, oh, he's going to bullshit. I just knew. And I looked him dead in the eye, and I didn't say anything, but I looked and I remember him looking back, and he crumbled, and he realized that he couldn't withstand this secret that he had experienced. He had been raped when he was 12, and he ended up having a complete breakdown. Me and the other coach escorted him out and we're kind of coaching him through this massive breakthrough of this secret that he had kept for 20 years.
Wow.
And after the 2 hours of just spending that time with him and having him digest what he had just shared and releasing that, I felt this need to call my dad. And I called him. I said, Dad, I know you still feel guilt and shame for what happened to me as a child. I understand that. I've forgiven you already. And I think that we just saved a life.
Wow.
And fast forward, my dad had passed, and I get on the phone, because I'd stayed in touch with this guy who I met at the seminar, who had the breakthrough. And he said, Kim, I don't think you realize how profound it was what you did for me. That look that you gave me, he goes, I will never forget that look for the rest of my life.
Wow.
And I said, why? He said, because I was planning my suicide for that night.
Wow.
So if my story of what I went through could save someone's life, it would be a disservice if I were to kind of gloss over and be like, yeah, some challenges happened in my childhood. I went through some things. The same was true with my husband. My husband, I was watching him. He's done a lot of public speaking. He was doing this talk about, he had this funny talk about for dating, and he's in the voiceover world, but he would do a dating panel, and he would share about his experience about losing everything He lost his ex-wife to his ex-best friend and lost his house, went bankrupt with his business, and was to the point of suicide. And literally had the gun to his temple. And he chose to not pull the trigger. And thank God, because 17 years later, I get to meet him and he's perfect for me. But I remember him telling that story and seeing how it landed when he would just kind of gloss over the impact of that experience, of like how deep and profound that moment is when you say you choose life, period. And when I would listen to his story, I remember telling him, after seeing the audience's response, I said, you need to hold space for that moment because your audience needs to experience that. And after he started doing that in his talks, he has had more people come up to him and say, you saved my life.
Wow.
Because we all have a story that mine may not resonate with someone in your audience, but it may resonate with just one.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can save just one life with our story, isn't it worth it to share it?
I would say yes.
I would agree.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for giving me the space to.
Of course. Through our journeys, through the ups and downs and the ebbs and flows of what life lays out, from beginning till now, in anybody's life, there are limiting beliefs. There is imposter syndrome that tends to pop up, especially as we're stepping into our power, especially for those that are stepping into a lead role, entrepreneurship, being a businesswoman, creating, building. What has been your personal experience around imposter syndrome?
Oh gosh. I mean, for the first year and a half of my coaching business, I made no money because I was doing all the pretty things online of all the photo shoots and Instagram posts and was like preaching about ownership and authenticity. And meanwhile, every wardrobe item in that photo shoot was borrowed. Every bit of it was aspirational for who I wanted to be, but it was not who I was embodying. Because when I was bought out of my e-commerce startup, like that buyout brought up so much for me. In my past, I'd had issues with my body, solved that. I had issues with relationships and choosing poor choices and partners in the past, figure that one out. But I never had any sort of issue with my career. Anything I wanted to go for, I just went for. I was always audacious. I was always ridiculously courageous. I was so willing to take a risk in my career. I would pivot like that. But after that buyout, everything was brought up by professional men, aka lawyers who were on my partner's side, not mine, brought up every single limiting belief that I feared to my face in the form of like, oh, you're so young, you don't have a college degree, you haven't been in business that long. What do you know? You don't have a marketing degree. Every fear that I had brought up by professionals. And I thought, well, maybe they're right. Meanwhile, forgetting that like while I was president of that company, I pitched it to the first round of Shark Tank auditions, got it featured on the Times Square billboards and in major magazines and on TV. So forgetting that piece, because that's what imposter syndrome does. Imposter syndrome is our ego swinging from like, I'm hot shit to like, I'm nothing at all. Like forgetting like You've done a lot. Like you've done
Yeah.
some really cool shit. And I think that that's the thing is you have to remind yourself when you're in that space of imposter syndrome, which is why in a way, like going on podcast interviews like yours, Sabrina, just being able to hear your own bio read back to you and you're like, damn, like, because it allows you to have that moment where you celebrate your win and you're like, yes, I actually have done a lot. And it's that reminder because so often we will ingrain our failures far more deeper inside of us than we will ingrain our successes. Especially for high achievers, it's very easy for us to bypass a success because we're like, oh, okay, done that. All right, what's my next Everest that I'm climbing? Like, instead of really truly embodying like, holy shit, like I did something, like I did it. But I didn't know that back then. So I had a year and a half in my business where I made no money. I literally think I made $100 from one coaching client in that entirety of that time. Literally doing it from coaching from my car with a notepad in between Pilates session while doing my Pilates training business. So it was in that space that I really had to look at the successes that I'd had. I had to reset my mindset. And it was once I went through that I realized that the same formula that got me into what I call like business bulimia or financial bulimia, where I was deeply in debt and, not making any money in my business, was the same formula that I went through when I went through actual bulimia. And so when I saw that success leaves clues, I was like, well, I successfully recovered from bulimia with no psychological or medical intervention. So I wonder if I just applied the same principles that I now embody in my body, where like I love my body. And that was a big discrepancy that I had with the eating disorder world because they always want to leave you as like you're labeled as recovered. But I'm like, no, a butterfly doesn't look back as like I might go back into being a caterpillar someday. Butterflies stays a butterfly. Like once you transform, you're done.
Yeah.
So I look back at that time and I'm like, I don't even recognize that girl. So I had to go back and rewire and rework, like what were all the processes that I had to go through? What were all my subconscious success strategies that made me successful in that? And then I just took that and mapped across like how that would apply to business. How could I apply that same strategy to my coaching business? How could I apply that same strategy to my financial numbers? And a huge piece was like, I had to stop looking at my bank account in the same way I used to look at my number on a scale. It was the same feelings that came up, and our subconscious mind is the domain of the feelings. So when I started to really process imposter syndrome, I had to look at how did I want to feel? Like imposter syndrome, it's not acknowledging the truth of what you actually probably have done in your life, which is probably more than you think because you're still alive at this point watching this right now. You've probably done some really, really cool, amazing things in your life that you aren't giving yourself credit for.
Mm-hmm.
This can be as simple as keeping a child alive. Like if you have birthed successfully a child and they are still alive, like congratulations. That is a challenge.
Yeah. Agree.
Yeah, because my 1-year-old, he just wants to leap off every, third, fourth step. And I'm like, catch us. So being able to like these small accomplishments, celebrating those minuscule wins that you think that like mean nothing because you've done them a million times. Like I know as soon as I get off this podcast, I'm celebrating that. I'm celebrating the fact that I got an opportunity to speak to your community. I'm celebrating the fact that more people got to hear my story. I'm celebrating the fact that I have built a platform that's allowed me to get on your podcast. So like those are all accomplishments that I need to ingrain in and remember and remind myself of like from an embodied level. And it's not from an egoic space either, because the ego likes to swing from like, you're nothing at all to like, I'm everything and no one else is anything. No, that's not true. It's like being able to have that full acceptance. Ownership is really the sword that conquers imposter syndrome. It's when you can own your shit, and you can also own sometimes that you've done some shit and were the shit from time to time. So when you are in that space of true ownership, there's no shame, blame, or guilt. It's an acceptance of where you are starting. And it's okay to be starting. And I see a lot of times with many of my clients, having coached leaders for the past 7 years, that when they start to have imposter syndrome creep in, it's simply because they're comparing themselves to an old identity of who they were, which is not really accepting where you're at. When you can actually start accepting, like one of my clients, very successful leader, built a very successful career in one industry, and now is wanting to begin a new career in a new industry, and it's scaring her. And the thing is, it's because she's a beginner and she's going to have to be a beginner at it. And so she's comparing where she is in her journey as a beginner to where she was and is in her past career. Yeah. And the problem is that she didn't start there. We have to remind ourselves, we climbed the mountain to get there. You're right back at climbing the mountain. So start climbing. Yeah. A great exercise I give a lot of my clients is, for any mentor that they have on Instagram or Facebook, or anyone who's built anything that they admire, go back and like scroll their Instagram to the very beginning. It may take like 5 minutes depending upon how often they post, but you'll see that they probably sucked a bit in the beginning. Like, if I tell all my clients, go back and listen to my first podcast episode. I was clunky and like not really eloquent, and I had all my bullet points and all my script, and like my first course, literally I scripted the entire thing because I didn't feel confident. It's still a damn good course though. Yeah. It still works. And the key was that I put it into action. Yeah. I took that step. I took the courageous action, said, I don't care whether I have to script this all or outline it. I'm getting this out there because this can serve. And that's where we really shift in imposter syndrome. Because when we have any sort of imposter syndrome, fear, guilt, shame, we're making our shit about us. When putting it out there is not about us. It's about who we can serve. It's about that one life that we can save. It's not about you.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's not about you. It is. It's about everybody else, you know. One of the things that I always say when I'm sharing a story or a post or what have you, I'm always emphasizing that I never share my story to hurt anybody, including myself. Yeah. I'm sharing my story in order to help and inspire other people. I mean, that's what the whole thing is. It's never malicious. It's never to hurt or to make anyone sad or feel bad. It's to inspire other people, to let them know that they can rise, they can rise above. I just love everything that you're about.
Thank you, Sabrina. Right back at you.
I think that you are doing an awesome thing. I love your drive in encouraging other people to step into their story and find the power behind it. I would love for those watching live, by the way, thank you so much for being here, for hanging out with us. For those of you watching on the replay, if you could hashtag replay wherever you're watching us at, so we can send you some love. If you are just jumping on, or you jumped on a little bit late, we love it if you could share this video wherever you are watching us at, so we can get more eyes and more ears on this awesome podcast and the wonderful women that we highlight. But I would love to ask Kimberly, what exactly do you do? Who exactly do you help? The people that are here watching you, they're obviously resonating. They've been watching for almost 40 minutes. They're hanging on to every word you're saying. Who do you link up with? Who do you help? Who's your client, I guess? And where can people find you?
So I work with the visionary leaders, the executives, the directors, the founders, the CEOs, the VPs, who really want to have what I consider brand alignment with who they are on the inside, exuding outward in how they lead and how they show up for their team and their community and those that they lead, sometimes even their families. And so I work with them on what does it mean to align, and we work on eliminating those self-limiting beliefs that are holding you back, and using a multitude of different modalities, from somatic release breath work to NLP and timeline therapy and hypnosis. And we use those modalities to really go to town on your subconscious mind, because it's never you. Like, your higher self is not the one holding you back. It's just sometimes your story. And if we can rewire and retrain your brain for new stories, you'll have a new result and a new story that may be more empowering and maybe more in alignment with the freedom and life that you want to experience. And so those are who I work with, for those who want to build an empire and who may want to make a serious impact, as well as some serious income as well. Like, I believe that you can't sustain the mission without the money. And so you need both in order to grow. And from there, if you have loved this conversation, if you want to dive deeper into your subconscious success strategy and find out what that is for you, you can just go on over to crownyourself.com and click the button that says work with me, and we can have a conversation.
Yes. And where do you hang out on social media? Where can people find you?
I am all over. You can find me at crownyourself.now. You can find me at kimberly.spencer on Instagram. And if you're looking to expand your reach, we also are hosting a podcasting party for those who want to make greater income and greater impact, and really use their story to transform people's lives on podcasts. And so we host a podcasting party through our agency, Communication Queens.
Yes. What are your big dreams for your business?
Oh, well, I am looking forward to having a very, very large event in the next decade, like Tony Robbins style sized event in the next decade. And we are going for our 7-figure year. I choose to break that mold that only 2% of female-owned businesses ever make it to 7 figures. I refuse. That percentage needs to be significantly increased. I have helped multiple clients get to their 7-figure year by just rewiring their subconscious patterns. And so this year it's my turn.
I love that. I didn't know that. 2%. Is that for real?
And only 15% of women ever make it to 6 figures.
Wow.
So
15%.
Yeah. Meaning a lot of women treat their business as a hobbyist rather than actually a business.
I was just talking about that on my mastermind this morning, as far as showing up. So many times we're waiting for the money to come in to start treating it like a business, but then we don't treat it like a business. So then the money doesn't come in. And then it just is this crazy cycle of we're just waiting to treat it like a business, but the money doesn't come unless we step up first.
Yeah. And it really comes to appointing yourself to say, like, my message deserves to be shared. My voice has a story that can serve. I have tools, resources, and skill sets that are valuable. And hello, world. You're welcome, internet.
Yes, definitely. Why do you do what you do?
Because an artist can't not create. And so I think the greatest art that we can create is transforming who we are as a human being.
Why, thank you for being here.
Oh, I thought that was a question. I was like, why thank you? That's an interesting one. You are very welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having this platform and this community and growing this. Like, I know this has been a huge soul calling for you.
Yeah.
And I'm so excited to see what you grow and build in the next year. It's going to be epic.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I know that you are a busy woman and you're getting pulled in many different directions. So knowing that you took some time out of your day to sit down with us and share some nuggets of information from your past and your story and what you do now, it means a lot to us. So any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Just own your story. Like that's the biggest takeaway. If I could sum it up, own your story, both the one that you're telling yourself. And if you don't like the one that you're telling yourself and it's creating not so great results in your life, you can always change it.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being here. For those of you watching live or on the replay, check out Kimberly Spencer at crownyourself.com. The link should be in the description wherever you are watching us at. If you resonated with all of her goodness, make sure you connect with her in all of the places. We love to make sure that we are all continuing to rise. Thank you for joining us today for this episode of Her Aversion. This community is expanding every single day and is filled with females who are striving to do better than they did yesterday. For those of you that are new to this podcast and like content like this, make sure you follow. If you have a story to share, check me out at hernation.life. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria, and I'm so grateful to be here sharing a platform that allows people to share their truth and inspire others. As always, do something awesome today.